When we talk about water, we usually call it a crisis, like it's a bad season, a temporary shock, something we can fix and then move on. A new United Nations University report says that framing is no longer enough. Its argument is blunt. The world has entered the era of global water bankruptcy. Not water stress, not a water crisis, bankruptcy. Meaning in many parts of the world, we have been using more water for decades than nature can reliably replace, and we have damaged the water assets that once made recovery possible. And for countries like Pakistan, already living with heat extremes, flood, drought and contested river systems, that diagnosis matters. Because it changes the question, how do we survive the next shock, to how do we live within permanently tighter water limits? Here's a summary of the report. First, let's start with what water bankruptcy means. Think of a water system like a household budget. Renewable water like rainfall, river flows and natural recharge is your monthly income. Aquifers, glaciers, wetlands, healthy soils are your savings. For years, many societies have been spending not just the income but also the savings. And now in some places, the savings are gone or damaged in ways that can't realistically bounce back on the human timescales. The report says that this is what makes bankruptcy different from a crisis. A crisis implies that you can recover and return to normal. Bankruptcy means the old normal is not coming back, and at least not within any planning horizon. Some losses are physically irreversible. Compacted aquifers do not rebound, sinking land does not rise, and lost wetlands and ecosystems do not return quickly, if they return at all. The report says that water risk is no longer marginal, it's systematic. Nearly 3/4 of the world population now lives in countries classified as water insecure or critically water insecure, and the basic gaps are still staggering. 2.2 billion people lack safely managed drinking water, 3.5 billion lack safely managed sanitation, and around 4 billion experience severe water scarcity for at least 1 month each year. This is why SDG 6 Water and Sanitation for All is described as far off track. One of the clearest signs of this bankruptcy is what is happening to surface water. The report says a growing number of major rivers now fail to breach the sea or fall below minimum environmental flow needs for large parts of the years. It also says that more than half of the world's large lakes have lost water since the early 1990s, affecting roughly a quarter of global population that depends on them. When lakes and rivers shrink, it's not just a nature story. It hits drinking water systems, irrigations, fisheries, transport, energy, and public health. The language used is deliberate. The report says that wetlands have been liquidated, like assets sold off. Over the past 5 decades, the world has lost roughly 410 million hectares of natural wetlands, nearly the land area of the European Union. And the economic value of the lost wetland ecosystem services is estimated at over $5.1 trillion. Wetlands are not decoration. They store water, filter pollution, reduce floods, support biodiversity, and protect livelihoods. When they disappear, the system becomes more extreme, more flood prone, more drought prone, and more fragile. Now to the water most of us do not see, but rely on every day. The report says that groundwater supplies about 50% of the global domestic water use, over 40% of the irrigation water that ties drinking water security and food production directly to aquifers. And the report warns that around 70% of the world's major aquifers show long-term decline. This is where irreversibility becomes very real. Overpumping has contributed to land subsidence, the ground physically sinking across more than 6 million square kilometers, including over 200,000 square kilometers of urban and densely populated areas where close to 2 billion people live. In some places, land is sinking by up to 25 centimeters a year. Once land sinks and aquifers compact, storage capacity can be permanently reduced and the flood risk rises. The report calls glaciers and snowpack a form of water savings, and it warns that we are liquidating them. It says the world has already lost more than 30% of the glacier mass since 1970 in multiple locations. Some low and mid-latitude mountain ranges could lose functional glaciers within decades, threatening the long-term water security of hundreds of millions who depend on snow melt-fed rivers for drinking water, irrigation, and hydropower. For South Asia, this is not abstract. Glacier and snowmelt-fed rivers underpin agriculture, electricity, and urban supplies. The report points out that around 70% of the global freshwater withdrawals go to agriculture, and it says roughly 3 billion people and more than half of the global food production sit in areas where total water storage is already declining or unstable. It also warns that over 170 million hectares of irrigated cropland are under high or very high water stress, roughly the combined area of France, Spain, Germany, and Italy. This is the core political economy problem. Water bankruptcy is not just an environmental issue. It's about food prices, jobs, rural stability, migration, pressure. Even when rain falls, degraded lands cannot hold it. The report says that more than half of the global agricultural land is moderately or severely degraded, reducing soil moisture retention and pushing drylands toward desertification. It highlights salinization too, degrading more than 100 million hectares of cropland in total. In plain terms, degraded land turns rainfall into runoff and dust instead of moisture stored in soil. The report argues that the modern drought is increasingly anthropogenic, driven by human factors like land degradation, groundwater depletion, climate change, not rainfall deficits alone. It says over 1.8 billion people lived under drought conditions in 2022 till 2023, and it estimates drought-related damages at around $307 billion per year globally, bigger than the annual GDP of most UN member states. Even where water volumes haven't collapsed, the report warns that the pollution and the salinization are shrinking what's actually usable. Untreated wastewater, agricultural runoff, industrial and mining effluents, all of it can make water unsafe or too expensive to treat for drinking, farming and ecosystems. So the resource base shrinks even before the river looks dry. The report says the planetary freshwater boundary has been transgressed, both blue water, which is surface, and groundwater, and green water, which is soil moisture. And it places this alongside the larger triple planetary crisis: climate, biodiversity loss and degradation. This is where the report gets political. It says that in many basins, the sum of legal water rights, informal expectations and development promises far exceeds what the degraded hydrological system can now provide. And it argues that the current global agenda, often centered on wash, incremental efficiency gains and generic IWRM prescriptions, is not enough for a world of structural overshoot and irreversibility. So what does it call for? A shift from the crisis management to bankruptcy management. In finance, declaring bankruptcy forces honesty. You recognize the debts, write down unrealistic claims and build a new balance sheet. The report says water governance needs the same kind of reset. Admit insolvency where it exists, manage irreversible damage honestly, share unavoidable losses fairly, protect basic human needs and environmental flows, provide social protection where the livelihoods must change, strengthen grievance and conflict resolution, especially in shared basins, because without a justice lens, reform can fuel instability and conflict. The report says that this is not a warning about future crisis. It's a declaration that much of the world is already operating beyond its hydrological means, and it points to upcoming milestones including UN water conferences in 2026 and 2028 and the 2030 deadline for SDG 6 as critical moments to embed this water bankruptcy diagnosis into policy and funding. The message is tough, but it's not fatalistic. Recognizing bankruptcy is not surrender. The report calls it the starting point for a more honest, science-based and justice-oriented water agenda before the remaining water capital is gone. For more such explainers, subscribe to DawnNews English.